Ladies and gentlemen, history have proven throughout all time that misunderstanding the other side in any conflict does not reach good things. If misunderstanding reaches a lack of knowledge to the other side and reaches very bad things, as history has proven and we will show throughout our case. Now, today, this House believes that school history should be only taught from an international perspective. Now, we have two main problems today in the status quo. The first one is the lack of international mutual accountability, which causes many harms to our international society as we become one big global community. And the second one is subjective history and actually misunderstanding facts, which is a problem that my second speaker will focus on. Now, let's first of all focus on the problem and then come to my arguments. So, what is the problem, ladies and gentlemen? We're all becoming one big global community. But there is a rock that is standing in our way to perfect understanding of all sides and peace. Now, this rock that is standing in our way is misunderstanding the other side in many conflicts that we have, big conflicts or small conflicts, that no thank you. But we believe that one of the main reasons that causes this is misunderstanding of other sides in many historical conflicts that affecting us to this very day. No thank you. Now let's see how history actually affects us nowadays. No thank you. Well, things that have happened in history have an effect upon us still this very day. And the examples can go on and on. We have conflicts that from the Bible days that still last between different ethnic groups. We have nations that didn't get over world wars or wars that were between two countries. And these conflicts that stayed from that time are affecting the countries these days. Now, yes.
Do you not agree that many of these misunderstandings stem from things like cultural differences?
Thank you. Of course, cultural differences are one of the reasons. But we believe that we can actually, we can take care of this in another debate. But there are things that we should take care of right now. And if we can just get one step closer to mutual understanding, which will be caused if we will actually propose and accept our plan, then this is good enough for us to win this debate and for us to accept this proposal. Now, all of this misunderstanding makes it harder for us to communicate as a global community, which makes it harder for us to reach understandings in many cases and to understand each other. No, thank you. Now, what we will do is we'll make schools teach programs that will include different perspective upon the same events. For example, we all know that World War II is taught in many different aspects in many different countries. We know that in Israel, for example, the main focus is upon the Holocaust. While in Germany, the main focus is about what led Germany to actually come to this war, which was the First World War. Now, we are aware that, for example, when they teach World War II in Israel, to Jewish people, then first of all, they only have the Holocaust aspect, while they don't teach the other sides of many other countries that joined World War II. No, thank you. And we all know that many Israeli students are not aware to the fact that also homosexuals, gypsies, and many other ethnic groups were murdered in the Holocaust. This is just no, thank you. This is one of many examples of lack of details while teaching history. Now, let's see how our plan, no thank you, will be efficient and will solve this major problem. Now, when we're getting out of our bubbles, we're exposed to many other opinions and other facts, then we can reach better understanding. The simplest example, when I'm fighting with my friend, I can never make up with him if I don't know what he's thinking. So I can never know how I'll balance my opinion in order to reach understanding with him. So this is what is happening nowadays. People in many countries only see their side of conflicts. Therefore, they can't reach understanding with other sides. And they can't actually create an opinion that is objective and is based upon many facts. They only see one side of the coin. Yes.
Do you not agree that many countries that historically have had, let's say, issues with Aboriginals, such as Canada, the United States, and Australia, can objectively look upon their past and regret the actions that their country took?
Thank you. We believe that if they regret the actions that their country took, then maybe they already saw the things objectively, and they saw the two sides of the story, which is what we're trying to achieve here, ladies and gentlemen. So actually, yes, your point of information supported my point. So we are clear that when you live in a certain country, you're exposed to a certain culture, you will always you won't never be the most objective person. You will always have a bit of more understanding to yourself. So what we are trying to do is to minimize this emphasis of your side. And we think that the best way to do this, as we will explain in our second point, is throughout history classes. Because once again, it won't solve because we're all in the mind that we are right. But if we can do as much as we can in order for us to minimize it, and this is the step that we have to take. Now, let's see how, in my second point, how actually there's no one that is getting harmed because of that. Now, we say that, ladies and gentlemen, our perspective, our side, we're more exposed to our side, our perspective, than to other sides, naturally, not in history classes and not history. And how is that? When we have conflicts that affect us until this very day, then it's always on the news. Then we can hear about it when we talk to our friends and to our parents. Then it's always out there. Now, then naturally, living in a certain country, makes you understand this country's point of view more. No thank you. Now, what am I going to? Our plan will actually help us see the other side as well, even if it means, ladies and gentlemen, that we will emphasize our side a bit less. Now, why do you think that it is legitimate for us to emphasize our side as a nation less, even though it is our nation and it's supposed to be the most important thing? Because we think that internationality here, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't play a less important role, and even plays a more important role. And because of that, and because of that, we believe that this is not mutually exclusive. Learning about your side while learning about international sides as well. Yes.
When you present these units, are you going to be doing like fact-based things, or are you actually going to be presenting it in these subjects?
Thank you. We can do both things, ladies and gentlemen. Because history is actually about both things. It's about taking facts and showing what was beyond these facts. And these opinions, the things that led people to, throughout history, to do certain things, are the facts, are based upon facts. Now, so what have I showed you in my second point? I showed you that actually our national side in this conflict is not getting harmed because it's not mutually exclusive, teaching what we think, what we taught till this very day, while also teaching an international point of view. And we believe that practically we're more exposed to our point of view anyway, so nothing is getting harmed. Well, the more important thing here, ladies and gentlemen, is understanding the international point of view. So if we all agree that our problem, that the rock that is standing in our way is a major rock, that we have to move out of our way to reach a better understanding, then we have to propose our plan. Thank you very much.
I don't know, maybe only the last
Girls, do you want to show it last time?
Sure. That'd be very nice, thanks. What we just heard was a side proposition with admirable goals, but the wrong way to reach those goals. It provided you with a case that had no model, no way of showing you how this bill would actually work. What is an international perspective? Is it simply the facts, or is it teaching every motivation that ever happened in every world conflict? We didn't get any answer to this. We don't have any idea what this international perspective is, how this international perspective would be regulated, whether we would need an international history board to decide what international perspectives we're teaching, what we want to know about this history, how would we regulate what classrooms are teaching what, how would we make sure that the classrooms are teaching what we actually want them to teach. We have no means of deciding this, we have no means of regulating this, and we have no means provided by side population. Furthermore, they never explain to you why countries would want to adopt this, why countries who really would be affected by the resolution would be okay with teaching the international perspectives. This isn't something that we've heard out of side population, that we would really like them to address that in their second speech, because we think that it's necessary for the round for us to know what we're talking about, how what we're talking about would be regulated, and whether or not this would even happen in the status quo. So now look at what we actually heard out of side proposition. We heard this kind of point about misunderstanding, or at least that's what we think we heard on side opposition. The fact that people misunderstand what happens in history simply because we don't teach it on an international perspective. My colleague raised on a POI, isn't this for reasons such as culture? And they conceded that this is in fact one of the reasons. And we have a couple of responses to this. Number one, it means that their goal can never be reached simply because there are other reasons that they're not dealing with. Number two, I think that because people have different cultures, this will always lead to misunderstanding, whether or not you are teaching it from an international perspective. Your culture will disagree with the perspective of another nation, whether or not you're teaching from their perspective. They mentioned in their speech that people simply cannot be objective unless we teach them all of these goals, unless we teach them all this international history. My partner raised in a POI, don't countries such as Canada, the United States, and Australia regret the treatment of the Aboriginals in their countries, and they conceded this on the side proposition, which is a contradiction to what they were trying to tell you. They told you people cannot be objective, yet when questioned about it by our side, they told you that in fact they can, and we have proven to you that they can and have with things such as the Canadian, American, and Australian Aboriginals. We'll take one of you.
If you agree that it's important that Canada, Australia, and the United States will regret on their actions, don't you think that we should make sure that the whole world will do the same and not only Canada, Australia, and the United States?
We don't think they've really shown you any analysis as to why either the whole world would do this, as to how this would be effective. They've only told you that not having misunderstandings is something that is good. We think that this is true, but we don't think that what side proposition has provided you with is a way to avoid misunderstanding. I think that the way to avoid misunderstanding is when you let people know the motivation behind political and historical actions. Motivation is the thing that we need to learn about if we actually want to know about history. They talked in their speech about how we can teach national history along with international perspectives, the perspective nationally. Not only do we not think that this goes into the resolution simply because the resolution states it would only be from an international perspective, but we think that when you're teaching growth, this leads to confusion and further divide, because you're telling them, yes, we're going to teach you our national perspective, we're going to teach you our national motivation, we're going to teach you their perspective as well, but their perspective is still wrong. This creates further divide, this creates further misunderstanding, this only takes a step back from the goals that side proposition would like to reach. The points that we're going to be bringing forward to you are my first point about the effect on state, my second point about the nature of history, and my partner is going to be talking to you about the lining of education, the streamlining of this, how this education would be impacted, how this education would work. The first sub-point under this is national pride. I think that even if people didn't have access to good information in society, even if in the classroom, even if in the society you were going to hear about these biases, there are a number of problems with not hearing about it at all. You think that you're surrounded by your country's morals all the time. It's important to know what your country stands for because that affects you directly. You're in a country that stands for something, you should know what they stand for, you should know who's for. When information is centered from you, you're disconnected from the state. It's less likely that in 20 years when you get older, you'll feel like you're going to do something for the country, or you'll feel like the country's doing anything for you. This disconnect between the state and the individual is something that is very harmful, something that we cannot support. Furthermore, we do believe that it's everywhere. And even when it's everywhere, which we see in the status quo, there are harms to this. If you're teaching something in the classroom, it's reliable information, it's controlled information, and it's a safe environment to challenge ideas and to explore new ideas. In society, the information cannot be controlled, isn't always reliable, and is subject to ignorant bias.
Is it actually, and in the classroom, is it something that is reliable? Because we believe that it is not objective.
Number one, we do believe that it's reliable. We do believe that you can't simply teach lies if you're telling people about the facts with motivation. But further than that, if you're teaching it in society, there's absolutely no means to control this. There's no means whatsoever, and we think that any means are better than no means at all. So to my second point, about the nature of history, and about what history is, how history is necessary, and how history requires the inclusion of the motivation behind it. History is about assessing and evaluating what happened in the past. Under the bill today, you you either get no reasons as to why things happen, or you get too many. And then this becomes a political statement, because you're teaching people, yes, we're teaching you about all of these sides, but this side was still wrong. It's not a real international perspective. History doesn't happen without individual motivation. History doesn't happen without being involved with multiple national perspectives. We don't think that it's fair that we have to teach history of a country without considering the country's national perspective. If your country has been involved with conflicts in the past, we think that it is your right, we think that it's beneficial for you to teach the students in your country about your motivation, about why that happened. We don't think there's any benefit if you're just learning the dates of history. We don't think learning like something happened in like 1900, something happened in like the 1700s is actually beneficial to you. We think that nothing can carry over to the present, nothing can apply to things you might want to know about now if you're only learning the dates. What you can carry over from history, protected time, sorry. What you can carry over from history is past indicates something that might happen in the future. And if we don't know the motivation behind this, we can't get any information from the date. If we don't know why a country did what they did, if we don't know why a country now regrets that action, or why a country still stands by why they did it, we cannot learn about what might happen in the future. We have nothing to carry over, and the learning of history is made useless. The learning of history is made into something that we can no longer utilize as a tool to use in society, a tool to provide understanding, a tool to provide this global community that side proposition would so like us to have. On side opposition, we stand for teaching history the way it is meant to be taught, the way it needs to be taught in order to be effective. And it is on that basis that we beg to oppose.
Second speaker on proposition.
Basically, in the first speech, the opposition kind of agreed with us. They said that they agree with our problem. They do believe that there's a problem of subjective information, of the fact that we are going to one side, to our side, more than the other, and that there is a lot of conflict because of that in the world. They agree with that. And then they try to tell us that there are a lot of other problems, except of history class, that leads to that. But ladies and gentlemen, the fact that there are other problems doesn't mean that our solution helps to solve, to make the problem we have today a bit better. To solve it a bit more, okay? We cannot solve all the hatred in the world, okay? We cannot make everyone be neutral and love each other. It's not logical, and it's not okay from the opposition to demand that from the government, because it's not what we should prove today in this debate. We should prove it that our solution will make the world, not make it better than it is in the status quo, and we never heard from opposition side why it is not going to work. Okay, so today's debate is going first of all to rebut what we heard from the opposition side, and then move to our third point, which is subjective history. The motion today is this House believes that, which means we should not provide it a specific plan, step by step, okay, to what we're going to do. Nothing. Because we're debating on the idea and not on the practical aspect. Nothing. But if they want, I'll tell you, as we told you already in our first speech, that we will teach that in high school, that okay, if they want to make sure that all the teachers teach this way, we'll do what we're doing today in order to inspect that all the teachers do what they should do. We'll make exams, we'll make international exams to make sure everyone aware of their international history, and we will have an international committee of history in the UN. It doesn't really matter for this debate because we're talking about the idea. They told us that they won't understand the history that we will teach, the international aspect, because first of all, the teacher will say, this is the side of the mean people, this is the side of our enemy, and will present it in the wrong way. And second of all, they will not want to listen. But we believe that at least they are exposed exposed to these things. At least they are aware that there's another side, and it makes them think, okay? It makes them develop their mind, and no matter what we will do, in some sort of way, it will get into their mind. And this is what we're looking for in the debate today. And the fact that the teacher will present it in a certain way, this is not allowed in the status quo today. The teacher cannot say his political view in class today. So if the teacher will do that, we will punish him as we should. Yeah.
Was your entire first teacher's not speech all about the fact that teachers cannot be unbiased and that they always have their bias within the education?
No, we're talking about the country. We're talking about when you have the Committee of Education in your country, what it dictates to the teachers to teach, that we will always try to teach a subjective side from our country. And I will explain further on that in my point. Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, nothing, we try to tell you that we will not teach about the country, that we will take the nationality side away from the country, but this is not true, because all around us, in the news, holidays, tradition, we have things that relate to our country. The effect, the thing that happened to our country, the subjective side of the country, is not going to be harmed at all. Nothing, we're just going to show you another side, not instead, but added to the side. Therefore, there's not a real harm to the state. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to my third point, which is subjective history. What is the point of history? The point of history is to handle with facts. And yes, here at Position, we believe that showing the motivation of people are part of the facts. One second. So, the point of history is to work with facts, is to show us events that happen, that there are no doubt they happened, and no doubt what happened there, most of the time. Yes?
Could you please clarify what your first speaker then meant when she said that you would be teaching both opinions and facts?
Yeah, exactly what I said. We will be teaching the motivation, okay? The motivation, you may consider it as opinion, we consider it as facts, okay? Because it's a fact that someone did something because he believed he should do it. And therefore, we count this as facts. So you may call it an opinion, we call it facts. This, we teach the same thing at the end, so something doesn't really matter how we call it. So we should not suppose to change history. It's not a story in literature class that we can interpret according to what we believe, according to our opinion, and how we feel at that specific moment. No, thank you. Okay? The only place we can interpret history is only after we learn all the facts. It's only after we know all the perspectives of the history, and this is exactly what we're going to do here. Now, in each country, every nation teach the history in a subjective way. Why not? We don't do it intentionally, but let's face it, we don't want to say that we were wrong. We don't want to say that we were mean and cruel and evil, that our enemy is right. We don't want to say it because it will hurt the morality of the people. It will hurt the patriotism, etc. So, the history becomes subjective instead of objective. This is no longer history. It's a lesson of legacy. It's a lesson of how to be a patriot. And this is not the point of history lesson. Now, we can only have a full opinion only when we know all the facts. Okay? Not that someone fed us with a teaspoon on how he believes and how he sees the world. Only when we can create our own opinion. And to do that, no thank you, we can do that only if we know all the facts. Now, why specifically in school and why, I showed you why specifically history class, why this is the right place to do so. Because this is the point of history. But why specifically in schools and why specifically in high school? Because, ladies and gentlemen, in high school, we decide what our opinion could be. We become grown up. We understand the situation more. We suddenly feel more connected to one thing and more rejected from the other thing. We create our identity in high school. And this is why, specifically in high school, we should be able to know all the facts and all the opinions. Now, this is the point of school. School should be a neutral place that represents different perspectives in order for us to decide what we see as right, what we see as the valid thing for us, and therefore to become better persons. The school prepares us for our middle life, also in the side of decide who we are as a person. And your opinion, Your political opinion in this debate is also a part of who you are as a person. And this is what, specifically in high school, we should teach that international objective history. So ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I showed you that the opposition did almost nothing in their first speech. Instead of agreeing with us, that we have a big problem, and not explaining you why our solution does not improve the situation we have today. Then I showed you what we do specifically in history lessons and what we do specifically at school and at high school, and I proved that as long as until now, we are winning this debate. So thank you very much, and I beg you to vote.
Thank you. We heard from the side of opposition today who believes that it's a good idea to implement a bill in which they conceded has no practical way to be implemented. If one believes that something can happen, it's essential for us to be able to practically implement it into society as well. In my speech today, I'm going to go through some refutation and rebuilding on what we said on side opposition. Then I'm going to get into the final constructive point of my case. And throughout my entire speech, I'm going to be examining especially the practical level of why this bill can't be implemented into the society and the importance of having this practical aspect in this debate. So first, let's get into some refutation about what we heard from side opposition, or from side proposition today. Sorry. The first point we heard from side proposition was that of a lack of mutual understanding. That they don't think that people have a good understanding of what happens in the world, and that they want everyone to just become buddy-buddy through learning about countries in history class. Our issue with that is that we don't think that people are necessarily going to gain a bigger appreciation for a country simply by listening to them in a school environment. Unless, of course, you're going to be presenting everything a country did in its history as a positive thing. Learning about terrible things that a country did in a war isn't going to give you appreciation for that country. It isn't going to make you have appreciation for their people necessarily, right? So we don't think that actually history class, we don't think that teaching the facts in a history class would give you any sort of like societal cohesion in this sense. Then we heard about how we don't have any plan or any model today because they don't think that practically this needs to be instituted. They said that we would never give you an international body such as in the UN who would regulate education because it isn't their role. But it is the role of side proposition today to show you that this is what's best for society. And it's never best for society to try and implement a bill that practically is impossible. We think that it's absolutely essential to know who would be deciding what is going to be taught. It's absolutely essential to know what is going to be taught. Because it's not only the amount of perspectives you hear, but it's also which perspectives you hear. It's also what within these perspectives you hear. It's not only the amount of information you're provided, but the actual information itself. So it is essential to know what the information is and to know who would be deciding it. Then finally, we heard about this idea of being subjective, how they want to eliminate all biases in history class through teaching these international perspectives. But like I told you, we don't think that it's only the amount of, it's not only the amount of perspectives that you're taught, but it's also the things within these perspectives. For example, like I told you, who's going to have the choice of who's teaching this? Is it going to be the state, which decides most educations now? Is a country actually going to be deciding the international perspective that you're giving? That's going to have the exact same bias as our current system. Then, yeah, sure.
Can you explain why it's going to be exactly? Because you keep saying it will be exactly, but you didn't provide any explanation so far.
When you say exactly, I'm going to assume exactly the same bias. But we think that if you're having your own country decide the perspective that you're going to be teaching about their country or in a war in which your country fought, you're still going to be teaching it with a bias of your perspective was correct. You're still going to be emphasizing it in your curriculum of this perspective was correct. So we think that essentially governments not only can they do that, they can just take away perspectives of certain nations. They can take away perspectives of the countries that fought against you and just teach you more of the perspectives that align with your own.
So we think that that's another reason why it's absolutely essential to know who is going to be understanding this, or who's going to be deciding this. So we heard all of these flaws within their case today. And what we saw go on our side is all of our arguments that our first speaker brought forth were essentially left untouched by side proposition today. We didn't hear any response to the fact that when you learn something in a classroom setting, like when you learn something like within like your national history, you can like hear more about like ideas in your own country that like you have like a better ability to like assess that. But also what we didn't hear a response to is that of like creating national pride. We didn't hear that response to the importance of having an understanding of your own roots. And we need to hear a response to this for side proposition. So now I'd like to get into the final constructive argument of our case today, that of tailoring education. And I have many subpoints at this point, the first being international regulation. So like I've already told you, is that we can't rely on a teacher to decide what they're going to be teaching their students. And we can't rely on the state to institute a curriculum that has like international perspectives. We think that essentially though, the issue is that any body can't take away the bias of like teaching international perspectives, because there is no right or wrong necessarily in history, right? There's no way for a person to decide what is going to be taught, like in terms of like what is right or what is wrong. So no matter what you emphasize and no matter what you say, people are still like going to have this idea of like not being able to decide. We also didn't hear like what perspective we would hear about. Would we only be hearing about like perspectives of say like European countries, or would we only be hearing about perspectives of like countries that align with you? So we think that it's absolutely essential to have some sort of regulation in this sense. But even if we did, we're not actually sure that would practically work because of how hard it would be to eliminate all of these biases. So then I want to go to my second subpoint, that of tailoring education. Education systems in the status quo are currently tailored to fit the needs of like individual societies. Like an example of this would be like regulating the age at which like you have to go to school, or regulating the length of which you have to go to school. For example, in countries where like people enter the workforce at a younger age, or where like agriculture is like important in like sustaining their economy, people often go to school for a shorter time than say in countries where you rely heavily on post-secondary education, because that's what just makes the like society like function in a better way. We also do this through like other subjects, such as like science. In more developed countries with more advanced science, we teach more advanced science in school, because in countries without it, it would be irrelevant. So we already value the idea of tailoring education so that it actually fits societal needs.
Yeah, because right now, when we are debating on a subject, we hear more on the other side, and we get and we need to think of the other side in order to present our own opinion.
I don't really understand what the question is. But I think that like when we have history now, essentially like what we're doing is that we're not forcing people to only hear an international perspective. What we're trying to tell you on side opposition today is the value of having your own national perspective within this. And we can't have both, considering the resolution was that it would only be like taught on this international level. So we also have this idea into my like third subpoint now about tailoring info in general. We don't force the media to teach all stories with international points of view, and that's because it's not practical, because international points of view are endless, and we also recognize the importance of not overwhelming people with excessive amounts of perspective. Let me ask you again, like what is the difference with history in this sense? Tailoring is important because society, like it makes society work better, and I gave you the examples of shortening education or providing like the right advancement of like science in school, right? And we think that like national like history actually makes society function better. Knowing your roots, like my honorable colleague told you, helps you like become more connected with your own country. It gives you a better sense of where you came from. So we think that it actually helps the individual. And we also told you that excessive info eventually stops being useful when you can't like have the ability to like analyze it, and you don't have your own roots to like help you understand more about it. So what we stand for on side opposition today is the importance of understanding where you come from and the importance of hearing about your own nationality. Thank you.
Someone like closing speaker for the commission.
Ladies and gentlemen, in this debate we had many disputes. But before we start with the areas of discussion we had in debate, I would like to start with what both teams agreed upon in this debate. First of all, both teams agreed that the goal the team problems should try to achieve in this debate, the multi accountability will go up in the world. We all agree that this is a good thing. Second of all, we all agree that history lessons are something that you cannot just learn the facts. That with the facts, you must learn also the opinion. And as team problems should be explained to you why actually when we say facts, we mean also the opinion. So it's a fact that someone did something because he believes something. That's a fact. And the third thing that we all agreed about is that nationalism is good and is important for the citizens. But as team proposition, we believe that also the multi accountability is important, like team opposition themselves agreed in the first speech. So that is why we want to do our part. So let's start with the area of question we had this debate. In proposition, we see two main questions raised. The first one is about the practicality, and the second one is about the national pride. That the opposition basically had only two main ideas that supposedly should destroy our case. The first one is that we did not bring any practical aspect to this debate. Well, on that we have a couple of things to say. First of all, this debate is the beliefs debate. The whole concept of this type of debate is arguing about the idea, ladies and gentlemen. That is why we see the practicality is not the most important thing in this debate. We see the idea, the whole idea of actually doing our plan, actually believing in our plan is enough for us to win. But we said even if we believe practice is not the most important thing, we will still go with the opposition, and we gave you a structure that how it works. We said during the first speech, like you also should mention, that the UN will be the one to regulate this kind of program. Second of all, we said that the international aspect actually means all the aspects that were in the event. For example, if we take World War II, then all children, like in the high school, will learn about the perspective of USA, the perspective of Germany, the perspective of Japan, the perspective of Italy. Basically, they will learn about the conflict from all the opinions that we had. And so it necessarily means that they will also learn about their own perspective, their own national perspective, because the national perspective is included in the international perspective.
Does this case not operate under the assumption that Japan or Germany has one national perspective on an issue and disregards the fact that historiography exists within society? Sure. Does this not assume that everyone in Germany has the same perspective on an event, rather than the current status quo where different historians have different opinions, and that is the historiography on certain issues?
Indeed, different historians have different opinions, but the problem is high school children don't have this knowledge of historians. They are only exposed to one perspective. They're only exposed to the subject as the education system teaches us. And how does the education system right now teach us? According to the perspective of the nation that the education system works in. And you said it yourself during your speech. That is why you protected so much the nationalism. So actually what we are trying to say is, we gave you structure. The UN will regulate this kind of, that you will determine the program, the education program. We are able to supervise this, like we supervise right now. Each the job of each teacher, how he teaches his class. We are able to do it right now. It's happening. It's not like they said. Basically, what they said is that we cannot make sure that everything. Will go out, and everybody will just have mutual accountability. So that's the first one. That we gave you a plan, and also we gave you the benefits of our plan. And second one, actually about the fact that will it work? Let's get to the real topic here. Will it work? We said to you that our job in this debate is actually making the status quo a better place. We did not try to solve the whole problem that we had in this debate, because we can't. There are so many aspects, there are so many rocks in our way to achieve this, that we need like 10 debates in order to really solve it. Now, thank you, ma'am. That's why we're focusing on this issue and this debate. So, if we prove to you that we are making the status quo a better place, with people that have a better, like a more objective opinion and feel more mutual accountability, we win at this debate. Now, thank you. And we present you this burden as a first speech, and since the opposition did not conflict our burden, we see that they agree that is our burden. Yes.
Are you going to be teaching every perspective in a positive light, or are you expecting people to gain appreciation by hearing about the bad things that a country is motivated to do?
Thank you, ma'am. You just leading me to what I want to say. Actually, we said to you in our first speech, we agree that we can't erase totally the perspective of the nation. Like, even if we teach all the perspective, yes, we believe that there will be still some of that, no, thank you, ma'am, of the national perspective that we have today. But the change will be that the children, the students, will be exposed to the whole opinion, will be exposed to all the perspectives that we had. And ladies and gentlemen, if the opposition thinks that knowing all the sides won't help you to make a more objective way, they are just completely wrong. In this debate, we see that you need to know both sides in order to all get a decision, Mr. Speaker. In order to get to the decision, you ought to know both sides. That is what we want to do. Even if you will go with one side or another side, that we still want to present the students all the sides in order to make them a more objective decision. Now, thank you, ma'am. So that is how our plan is going to work. We're going to expose the children to all the opinions, all the perspectives we had on this event. Now, thank you, ma'am. And so it necessarily will work because as you are exposed to more opinions, you can make a more objective decision. Even if the objective decision is the same decision you had in the status quo, we still believe that we must have a more objective way, because that way we have a much bigger chance to go get this mutual accountability that we want to improve in this debate. So that's how we start. Let's cover the practicality aspect of this debate. Let's go to the second area of discussion, about the national pride. They told us the national pride is important. The problem is they misunderstood us. We agree, national pride is important, but we believe that we need to reduce it a little bit to make the mutual accountability a lot higher. And second of all, we told you that the national perspective will be put in the international perspective, because if you learn about all the perspectives, of course you will learn about yours. And second of all, both teams agree that we have a lot of this perspective floating around in our society. We have that in the media, in the papers, in the radio. We are exposed to it. This is the nation that we live in. So actually, also the national pride actually goes from our side. So let's see what you have. Let's see what they told you today. I told you actually that the practicality is not the most important thing in this debate, but we still present you a practical way that will work. Second of all, we proved to you that we're making the status that what we present will make the status quo a little bit better. It will make the pupils to have a better chance to get an objective opinion and actually to raise that mutual accountability. And that is our job of this debate. Because of that, we win. Thank you.
Side proposition came to today's debate with the context that the reason this motion was put in place was because of the fact that countries cannot be objective. Because there is a need, because individual countries will always present biased information, because an individual country has no motivation to teach other sides and will only ever say it was right and will never say it was wrong. This is the problem side proposition is trying to solve with the bill that they put forth, and that is what the first speaker told you. But within the same 8 minutes, the first speaker also told you, ladies and gentlemen, that countries can be objective, and that we've seen it in cases like Canada, Australia, and the United States. Their only reply to this damaging POI was that we want other countries to be able to do the same. In that one reply, not only did side proposition agree that countries can be objective, but they also told you that this is something that happens. What we see is that what side proposition doesn't recognize in the status quo is that this is something that is not exclusive to those two countries. If we look to countries like Germany and France, which have historically had a very rocky past, if we look at World War I and World War II, these countries have historically never gotten along. But if you look at the status quo today, they've actually reflected and altered and changed upon their past and now work together to cooperate within the EU. What we recognize today on side opposition is that countries are not stagnated, that they are able to reflect upon their past, and that we do not accept the image that side proposition has created today. That of individual countries who will never say that they are wrong, who will only say that they are right, and will never actually teach a fair history for us. The need that they have proven in this debate does not exist. So let's look at the three areas of clash. Data, being the nature of history, the principles, the meaning behind this debate, and the effect on education. So first, let's look at the nature of history. And what we heard from side proposition today was basically we should be teaching facts and opinions. That we need to be teaching the German opinion or the Japanese opinion on World War I. That these are the things that students need to expose their minds to. But what they didn't understand in the POI that I brought up is that there is no such thing as a German opinion on World War I. There is no such thing as a Japanese opinion on World War II. What we see is that is a concept that side proposition has fictionally created. What I asked in the POI, which I think was missed and I'd like to hear responded to in the reply speech, is the idea of historiography. The idea that historical opinions are often based on what historians like. We recognize that within Japan, right, you could, for example, have different people who have a traditionalist view of the history or the post-revisionist view. A perfect example of this is Stalin. What we see is that within the country of Russia, there are traditional views where Stalin was a fantastic guy and he really helped out the country and was some awesome war hero. But then we see the post-revisionist history of that within Russia, the same country, is also that Stalin caused a lot of damage to the nation, that Stalin cost a lot of lives. What we do realize from this example is that there wasn't one Russian opinion, and there still isn't. What we'd like to ask side of proposition, maybe they can answer it now in the POI, is which one are they teaching? Which one are they labeling all German people to believe?
The problem is historians have a different view because they know all the facts. They learn it, they have an objective figures, they know the facts. The problem is we want also pupils to know. We want them to know all the perspectives so we'll be able to make an objective decision like the historian.
Okay, so that doesn't really address the issue that I'm talking about, but I'll respond to it momentarily. What we just heard is a POI that was trying to refute the idea that we can't, basically the reply to what I'm trying to tell you right now about the idea that there isn't one German perspective as they've been telling you down the bench is the concept that students don't have all of the ideas, so we can't give them all the facts. So then we're assuming that you want to teach them all the historiography of every subject from all international countries that are involved. We recognize to move away from the practicality that you cannot teach the entire historiography of German historiographers and what they believe. You cannot teach the entire historiography of Japanese historiographers. We recognize that there's a limit to how much information you give. No thank you. We also think that principally it's unfair to label an entire country with one brush. We think that it is really unfair to different individuals who live within a country to be labeled as, this is my Canadian opinion. We recognize that opinions are not dictated by the country you live in, but a lot of other factors. We don't think the education system has the right to do that, especially in a subject like this one. No thank you. Then in the second speech, we heard this idea that basically we would be teaching this in high school because of the fact that in high school you're creating your identity. But they also conceded earlier on in their case that this bias is consistent within society. So I'd like to ask side proposition, why after, say, 15 years of being exposed to this bias within your country is for example, maybe a one-year history course going to rewrite that bias that you're exposed to? We would like to argue that the 15 years of your life before high school are actually more important in creating your identity than actually is a half of your course of history. No, thank you. Now let's look at the principles we need for this model. They told you on side proposition that the reason we need this is because the world is becoming one and there are misunderstandings that are taking us apart. No thank you. First off, we never actually agreed to this problem. We think that even if we don't think that teaching history is actually going to solve the disconnect between people. Their response was, well, it's going to help. We actually don't think it will. We brought up analysis as to why it's going to worsen the bias, and I'll talk about that in the next event. We told you that other things are keeping them apart. What we recognize is that people may have like strong cultural conflicts, right? So we think that it's only going to it's not going to remove that. If another country hates another country, and you have a child being told that since birth, we find it very hard to believe that education is going to fix that. If anything, it's going to harm the child's perception of education. Let's look at the example one moment, please, of individuals who are very religious, who are taught, let's say, evolution within their classrooms. We don't think that those children are any more likely to believe evolution. We do think they are more likely to criticize the education system, to not believe their teachers, and lose respect for the information you're being told. That is a huge problem for the education system. Please deal with it.
If education created it, therefore education is the only way to solve it. Therefore our plan is exactly addressing the problem that you just brought.
We don't think education created it. That's what we're saying. We think that what created it is cultural conflict, religious conflict, other misunderstandings, and we don't believe that education is going to solve it. We think that it's actually going to harm the perception of education and have the opposite effect that you laid out. They told you that countries cannot be objective. We've already made it pretty clear outside opposition that they can, they have, and they've never told you why that's going to stop now. We don't understand why countries are suddenly going to become these like monstrous individuals who will never recognize wrong. We don't think that's true. They told you on the idea of national pride that they agree it's a good thing, but like holidays can do the same as teaching your country's past. We believe that having a holiday isn't going to have the same effect as actually truly like understanding where your country came from. But let's look at this last thing now, which is the effect of education. They told you that teaching national perspectives is a bad thing because it's going to be inevitably biased. This is the line of art, this is like the logic that they started with. But then they told you that for some reason we can teach both. So let's follow this logical connection through. If teaching national information is always going to be biased, or we're teaching the biased information with international perspectives, what does this happen in the classroom? We think what this means now is that the other international perspectives are actually going to be devalued. You're not going to be allowing the citizens, these individual students, to be, making their own opinion because they agree that bias would be there, right? So what we think happens now instead is we're criticizing different opinions of now opinions that are labeled as the Japanese opinion or the American opinion as opposed to historiography. We think that's a huge problem when citizens are now criticizing a country's opinion because they are getting a biased form in favor of their national opinion. That is a huge divide, that is a huge harm of this bill, and that's something that side proposition has never addressed. They brought up their model of second speech. I think it's pretty clear that a UN Council for international exams is pretty unrealistic. They never told us how this is going to help children reconcile what they're being told in school versus what they're being told in society, and they never talked about the argument, the idea of tailoring education. And for all these reasons that we beg to oppose. The timer?
No, I was going through mine.
Oh, you're going through yours?
There was a time set up playing, but you spoke
Yeah, that was
at
like 20.
So yeah.
Okay, sorry for the confusion.
No problem, I just wanted to.
No, she spoke 8 points.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. In this debate, we've seen two sides who brought up multiple points on the topics of history and national pride, but we've seen two sides who really we've seen a side proposition rather, who really have failed to meet what side opposition has provided you with, which is analysis as to why the history that is being taught isn't going to be effective, and analysis as to why this will hurt national pride. And that is why those are my 2 themes to talk about today. Now I believe, first of all, before I get into the 2 themes, that my partner in her third speech really well addressed the practical issues of this bill. We cannot debate a should resolution if this could not happen ever in society, and that is what we believe on side opposition. So into the history. We think that they never addressed numerous ideas that we brought up on side opposition. We brought up the idea that when you give people too many reasons, this furthers confusion and furthers divide. We didn't hear any response to this. We didn't hear any response as to how when we further divide between a country, this is only what will decrease understanding. This is only what will decrease the idea that side proposition would like to tell you. My partner talked to you about why this idea isn't something that can happen after this resolution. This idea is something that exists for different reasons that I'm trying to tell you. And this idea is something that isn't the problem that I'm trying to tell you. I'm trying to search exists. My partner asked in her speech whether or not we would have an international news body control what we put in the news, to control what a country says in the news. And we didn't hear any response to this either. Unless you're going to control and censor all of the information that a government puts out, you cannot censor the government because they're going to get in society. And we've already addressed, even if it doesn't happen in society that harms, I'm only hearing things in history class that are facts. Only hearing things in history class that don't really address the real motivation, that don't really address what actually happened. And look at my second theme of national. We talked a lot about this in my first speech, and we gave you some analysis as to why when you feel a disconnect to your state, to the country, to why your country does the things that they do, to their stance on an international level, this makes you less likely to feel as though you should do something for your country, and it makes the country, or it makes you rather, feel as though the country isn't doing as much for you. I think that national pride is something that is very beneficial in society. It's something that is a necessity. When you feel a pride in your country, when you feel a connect to your country, this makes society more effective, more productive as a whole. This makes society the place that side proposition would like it to be. We talked to you about how national pride can be furthered when you're teaching history in class, when you're teaching the real things that happen. In a classroom, when you're learning history, it can be controlled more than it can be in society. It can be controlled to the degree where the information that you're learning is reliable, to the degree where the information that you're learning is being provided in a forum for you to provide yourself with the most understanding, to provide yourself with the opportunity to challenge ideas. And this was another thing that was never addressed by Senate composition. They never told you why the ability to evaluate and to challenge ideas in your own country in your classroom is something that isn't happening now, that cannot happen under side opposition. They talk to you about the fact that countries need to feel accountable. Countries need to be accountable to their actions. They need to be objective in what they're doing. My partner dealt with this well in her final speech, when she told me that they had provided you with no analysis as to why these countries are unobjective. We have provided you not only with analysis as to why countries can be objective, but numerous examples. For the reasons that we on side opposition stand by the history that gives you the best understanding, stand by the history that makes national pride and society function better as a whole, we beg to differ.
Thank you. Don't reply.
The main idea of the opposition team in this debate today is that our solution is not practical. This was basically their whole idea. They didn't argue with us that it's not justified to do so, so we believe that if we will prove you right now, as we proved you already in every speech part, that the idea is practical and is going to work and is going to make the situation better, we won in this debate because this was the only thing they presented. But, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to notice that the opposition had made a problem in their case. They constantly contradicted themselves. They told us that the countries are not objective, and then they told us the countries are objective. They told us that they agree with our problem, and then they do not agree with our problem. They told us we do not supervise what we teach in the classes, and then they said we can supervise what we teach in the classes, we cannot supervise what the students will understand. We can see that the opposition is really confused in this debate and only addresses the practical side. So, I will show you by three main issues that we showed you, we proved you that our side is the right side while the opposition did almost nothing. So let's go on. On the practical side, we don't believe that we have should show you a thing to work. We think we have should address the idea of teaching historical international perspective of history. But even if we should show you a practical side, we did, ladies and gentlemen. In the second speech, in the third speech, and even in the first speech, we did all the time. We didn't know the QI, and the opposition just ignored what we said. We told you about the UN, we told you about the international exams, we told you about everything. And if the opposition believes that we cannot control what the teachers teach in classes because it's not, well, it's not fact, then they have a problem with the education system. Then they have a problem with every subject except math. And then they have a problem that it's not related to this debate. Okay? We cannot show opinions as the opposition tried to keep telling you. We show sides. We show different sides of different countries. And this is something that we can pinpoint on today. It's not creating more damage as they try to tell you and we constantly contradict. Okay, now to the second point. They all the time exaggerated what was said. All the time. They exaggerated the situation. Okay? They changed the history class, the purpose of history class, to something that should be a solution to all the bad things in the world. To something that will make people to hug each other, love each other, and live together happily ever after. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the situation, this is not what we try to prove in this debate today. All we try to prove, and we told you that, is to improve the situation, is to make it a bit better. It's because people to understand a bit more the other side and not live in their own bubble. And we succeeded on doing it, and the opposition never said we didn't. So, we cannot control what the student will understand and what the student will believe in and what the student will take with him from the class. And we do not want to do so. But we can control what we're teaching them, and this is exactly what we're doing in this debate. And now the third thing is what is the country's opinion, and it is subjective or not. They told us that there are countries with an objective opinion. Great! That means that our solution can work. That means that we can achieve what we want. And they can tell us you have individual with different opinion. That's right. On every subject you have, every people think something else. But as we told you, you do have a majority that believes something, and we're not talking about my personal opinion, we talk about the side. What happened to that specific country in the war? Okay, what happened to the other side and not what happened only to my side? This is what we want to teach those students in this debate, because at the minute they are aware of that, the situation will be better, and we showed you that constantly. So, we proved that even on the practice side, we win. They never said we don't win on the justified side. Therefore, we win in this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now please shake your hands and be cool, and we'll go back and time.